Welcome to What the World Needs Now with hosts Tom Whisinnand and Josh Monroe. We hope that you're able to leave feeling encouraged and ready for another day of changing lives in the field of education as we speak with inspirational teachers from across the nation and world about what keeps their spark lit.
In this episode, we talk with Sarah Campbell, a high school English teacher from Ketchikan, Alaska, about how she has students find commonalities in hopes of creating a more peaceful world. Without any further ado, Sarah Campbell.
Sarah, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. For our listeners that don't have the privilege of knowing who you are, could you tell us where are you from, who are you, and what's your role in education?
All right. Well, thank you for having me, Tom and Josh. My name is Sarah Campbell, and I am from Ketchikan, Alaska. It's a small island community located in Southeast Alaska. So if you look on a map, you might not find us right away, but we're in what's called the Panhandle, and we look like an island off the coast of British Columbia, Canada. So anyway, I am in my 22nd year of teaching English, and I teach currently at Ketchikan High School. Ketchikan High School, you want to know what our mascot is?
We do.
Fisherman?
Oh, you're close. We are the king salmon. So we're called the K-High Kings. And I don't know, I would say we're probably the only high school in the country to have a fish for a mascot, at least a king salmon anyway. So one other fun fact, I graduated from the high school that I now teach at, which is, I think, a pretty special thing. And about half of my colleagues actually are also K-High alumni. So we graduated and we went outside of Alaska to get our education, most of us, and then made the choice to come back and live and work here in this great community.
That's very cool. Josh teaches at the same school that he went to as well. And sometimes we talk about how cool that is to be like part of the community and give back to those kids that are there.
Yeah, it is. And I think, really for me, it's a huge credit to the teachers who I had growing up because they made school so much fun. And I don't think a lot of them were really from Ketchikan. We had a few on staff who were born here and graduated, but most of them were from outside, but they just made high school and learning such a memorable part of my growing up. So I wanted to come back and work. Josh, when you started teaching at your school, did you have any teachers there who were your teachers and now coworkers?
I did. So I went into teaching because of my fourth grade teacher, Mr. Henry, and now he is my partner in teaching. So we work classroom by classroom. And it was weird to start. Like, do you have that experience? Because it was really weird at first. And now I'm 10 years down the road and it's a little bit more, hey, how you doing? I don't have to call him Mr. Henry anymore. So
no, I know I'm a little older than you. So most of my teachers have retired. But when I first started teaching on staff, it was kind of one of those things. Do I call you by your first name or your last name? And out of respect, you just gravitate toward referring to them as, Mr. Bowling or whatever. Yeah.
It's weird how that works, right? Like, and then you become friends with them and you realize like, hey, the impact that you had on me has made a lifelong impact. And what I love that you were sharing about is that you left Alaska, right? And then you came back to where you're from.
Yeah. Yeah. And just temporarily. So just for college, I can't say that I, left for a long period of time, but my parents live here and my brother actually teaches at the same high school that I do. And one of my best friends, she and I we met in 7th grade, actually at the middle school, and then started eating lunch together. And she teaches in the math department. I'm in the English department. We eat lunch together every day still. So I think there is something to be said. And that's a big part, I think, of my practice and who I am is connections. And you build these long-term connections with people. And especially in Ketchikan, you don't just have friends for a couple of years, they're your friends for life. And so it really is fulfilling and rewarding. I feel like some days I get more than, I give, but hopefully that's not the case.
Sarah, I'm curious. You chose to pursue education. You went back to Ketchikan. What made you pursue education? What was the impetus to kind of go down that road?
Well, I think, as I had said, a big part of it was my high school experience and my experiences growing up here in Ketchikan schools, just a really fun environment. So when I think about what do you want to do with 8 hours of your day, when you think about that, the most fun job ever, which would be teaching. But going back even early on, and I'm sure a lot of teachers say this, I remember playing school with the kids that I'd babysit. And of course, I was always the teacher. So there's just something that's always drawn me to education. I love to learn. I really love people. And so it's just a natural fit for me. When I went to college initially, I wanted to be a biology teacher. And I think it's because my high school biology teacher just was really great. And you got to do labs and lots of learning. And then I got to college and I realized, ooh, no, I'm wasn't doing so well in the science classes. And so it took me a bit, but then I landed in English and it was just the perfect fit. And I don't know why I fought becoming an English teacher, but it's definitely where I'm supposed to be.
What I love most of what you said was I love people, and so this is the route that I took. Like, tell us more about that, because I think that for Tom and I, we've got a lot of listeners that are going into education. And we need to preach that message more. Like, you have to love people if you're going to take this job on, right?
Yeah, I absolutely. And like many in the beginning, I think I was more worried about the content. I was more worried about, my lesson plans. But then in being in this profession for 22 years, really, of course, the content of what you teach is critical, but it is the connections that you build with your students and the rapport. And again, it's so great because I have students in my class and I went to high school with their parents. And I know their grandparents, and my first job was from your dad, who employed me way back when. So to me, it is all about connection and the people. And I'm also on the other side of it now, where I have grown children. My son is a senior in high school. He's about ready to graduate. My daughter now is second year at university. And so the coolest part ever was being able to teach my children alongside their friends and to watch them grow up. And I had a very different vantage point, I think, right? Because I wasn't just the mom, I was also Mrs. Campbell. So I kind of had a little in with them, which was really fun.
Sarah, you do a lot of work with peace and a lot of work with World Peace Day.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And you have a really, really powerful story about how that kind of came to be. Would you tell our listeners and our viewers kind of about that? Because it's one of the most intriguing and I think inspirational stories that I've read or I want to hear more about.
Thank you. Well, I have a love and a passion for East Asia. And growing up in this town, we had a sister city with Japan. So that's a big part of what sparked my curiosity in Asian culture. And so I applied for a professional development opportunity through 5 colleges for their East Asian Center. And they accepted me. So I was one of 13 teachers in the United States selected to travel to Japan specifically to learn about peace education. And I'm part of this study tour. We visited both Hiroshima and Nagasaki and visited the memorial parks. But really, honestly, the highlight was getting to meet atomic bomb survivors, hearing their story, listening to what they endured at a very young age. There wasn't any desire for vengeance. There wasn't any hatred. It was a message that strongly was one of hope and one of peace. And do you know the story of Sadako and the paper cranes, the 1,000 paper cranes? And the Japanese legend is if you fold 1,000 of them, your wish will come true. We met with her brother, Sadako, and Sadako's brother, Masahiro. And he said, we need to teach our children to have compassion, and we need to teach our children to have open hearts, because only when you have open hearts and you listen, that is how we cultivate peace, essentially. And so that's his message. that he sent. And so that resonated with me. And I came back and decided to create a unit of study for my Asian literature class. And we explored the atomic bombs. We explored, testimonies from the survivors. We looked at how both of those cities commemorate these difficult histories, because they are incredibly complex and difficult. And Japanese will say, hey, we absolutely were active agents in this war as well. And we were at war with the United States. But what they look at now is they say, we are allies, we are friends, and we're moving forward together. So anyway, that was such a powerful lesson and story for me to bring back to my students. Then, of course, all great teachers learn from their students. I had a student say, Mrs. Campbell, we should share this with the whole school. And, the question was, what does peace mean to you? What can we learn from these difficult histories? And so that's what sparked Peace Week. Actually, it was just one day, one assembly on the International Day of Peace, which is September 21st. And I arranged a school-wide assembly. And I thought, oh my gosh, I don't know how this is going to go. Are these high school students going to boo us off the stage? Are they going to, throw things at, no, it went over so well with the students that we just had our 5th year celebration for Peace Week this year. So it's become something that kids look forward to. Yeah.
I think that's awesome, because oftentimes we forget what it's like to be a kid, right? And like how we want to be molded as children. And you're doing that for them, right? You're teaching them about some horrible things that happened in history and giving them those real life lessons, but teaching them like, let's be better, right? Let's love each other and let's come together. And how do we do that, right? You're giving them that question. How do we do that? And then you're modeling it.
Yeah. And it's, even though we celebrate, let's say, Peace Day on the International Day of Peace in September, really we start planning for it in the summer. And there's a group of students now who look forward to it and say, hey, what's our theme? And what are we going to do? And it was difficult with COVID because we couldn't gather last year or this year in a large group assembly. So a lot of the stuff kind of happened online and through social media campaigns. And but that had value too, because students could put something positive on social media, on Instagram and Snapchat and Facebook, and really promote peace and what it means to them, and reaching out and trying to build connections with other people, because that's ultimately what these students, their big takeaway is, honestly, is, hey, you may live in a different section of town, or you may have, eat different food than we do at our dinner table each night. But at the end of the day, there's a lot more about us that's similar than different. And they find that commonality in spite of their differences. And that's where then they're building that connection with other people. So I am tremendously proud of Peace Week and all that the students do. But again, honestly, the inspiration came about because of other great educators out there wanting to teach me about different regions of the world. So anyway, that's my avenue of trying to help others foster that connection for themselves.
Sarah, I think you're just an amazing educator, sitting and listening to this powerful, powerful story, and the way you model lifelong learning and expanding horizons to the global community that now we're all part of, and empowering students to really not just learn about, but really then take charge of, what does this Peace Week look like? Kudos to you for doing that. I think if we had teachers all over the world like that, we'd be raising some amazing students. And I know we are, but you're definitely extraordinary. Has there ever been a time where maybe you haven't felt as accomplished or as like inspired? And what did you do to kind of get through that slump or that hump? Education's hard nowadays. Like, it's really tough. And we have people looking for that inspiration. Where did you find inspiration to get through a rough time or two?
Well, For me, it's going back to the basics, which is I love to learn and I love people. And so when you put those two together, that's where I find my inspiration. COVID was pretty tough, for all of us for a variety of different reasons. Being closed off, sitting at my kitchen table, trying to connect with students over Zoom, really, I felt unfulfilled in so many ways. And so what I tried to do during that time was, take a new class, go for a walk, volunteer. The weather in the spring of COVID in March and April of 2020, allowed me to get out there, and I had a garbage bag and I put on my plastic gloves and I went out on the bike path and I started picking up trash. And I know that sounds kind of silly, but it made me feel good. It made me feel like I was doing something of note. I found that I connected with my students in other ways during that time. Many of them who I was working with were seniors in high school. Graduation and prom and all these end of the year festivities didn't quite look what they had imagined their whole life. I wrote them little cards, and sent them in the mail, just to let them know that I was still thinking of them. And our community really did band together to support our graduating seniors that year. We held an outdoor kind of graduation walk for them. And that's something Ketchikan does really well. So, we support our kids. And so where do I get my inspiration? Well, I think back from my community who helped shape me, right? And so that's a huge source of that. Ketchikan is a small, tiny little town, but I tell you what, we are big, kind of powerful, tight-knit group too. So now that you've heard of us, I bet you one day you'll meet another person you'll go, oh, hey, I've heard of somebody from Ketchikan before.
Well, I want to come up there. I want to meet you all. It sounds like just a magical place, Sarah. It sounds awesome.
Well, no place is perfect, but I am pretty darn proud of my town. And I would say come in June or July so that you have a chance of some sunshine.
Yeah, I was going to say we need a little bit of sunshine, right?
Yeah.
A little bit of warmth. Nebraska's probably not much better than it is up there right now. Like it's pretty cold, but what I love about what you're sharing though is just the way your community comes together. Because at least when I sit and reflect on my own practice, that's something that I struggled with at the beginning is how do I build those connections beyond my classroom?
Mm-hmm.
So being where you are now and the ways that you've done that, like how do we spread that message to other educators that it's a tough job, right? Like our classroom is within these four walls, but it doesn't have to stay here. Right. And here's how we get it beyond. So I know I'm asking you like to solve all of the world's problems right now, but how do we take those first steps to being a classroom that reaches beyond four walls?
Well, and I think that's contingent upon the teacher and depends on the interest. For some it might be music or performing arts. For some it might be, volunteer or people. For others it just kind of, again, who are you as a teacher and what comes naturally to you? I think that's what we all bring to this, right? I have a student teacher this year for the first time ever, which has been really also truly inspiring. I highly recommend it because after 22 years, sometimes you're on autopilot of this job a little bit. And so in working with a young new pre-service teacher, it's really helped me to rethink some of my philosophies of where I started and kind of where I am now in this journey. But one analogy I kind of give to her is, we're all following maybe a recipe, right? We're chefs in the kitchen. But what's really unique, I think, is how we bring in those special ingredients and what we do with them. And that I just truly believe is the art form and the joy. And for me, the interest of this profession. Teaching is hard, but go back to what really brought you into it and what gives you the joy or the little giddy up and focus in on that. And then, just keep making those base hits. And pretty soon, then you put it all together and it's this beautiful grand slam. I use weird analogies, I'm sorry. But
That's absolutely spot on. I love it because we as educators really do bring a lot to the table if we open ourselves up, and the kids pick up on what we're excited about. And if we're excited about it, they get excited about it.
yeah.
I love that. I just absolutely love
It almost reminds me, Tom, of you've got young kids, so Ratatouille, right? You remember that?
Yes.
Just
Yes.
about like, hey, we're gonna make this dish from this recipe, but hey, Ratatouille's gonna make us do it in this cool new way, and we're gonna see it from a different perspective.
Yeah, and I just, I really want teachers to realize that they should embrace that uniqueness that they have, because if every single teacher in the building is exactly the same, then we're doing a disservice to our students, because all our students aren't all the same. And so, that's the exciting part, I think, of this, right? It's really contingent upon personality and your people skills, and building that in, and developing kind of your role and your niche that you're going to fill in the school, whatever that is. So
Sarah, can we shift gears a little bit? I'm really curious. We've interviewed somebody from Hawaii, from India, from Canada, but give us a little bit of an insight into education in Alaska, what that looks like. It's a huge, massive area, right? The state of Alaska is ginormous. So what does that look like?
it is very different depending on where you're located. So the school district, my town in Ketchikan, has about 14,000 people. The school district is comprised of 2,200 students.
Oh, wow.
And we only have one school district in this community, in this town. So to kind of put it into perspective, in my English teacher, or at my high school, there are 5 English teachers, and I'm one of 5. Right. And we have 1 middle school, and they have 3, so it's very small staff, essentially. When you go up north to Anchorage, which is the largest district, they have thousands of students, and, it's one big district, but, of course, lots and lots of different teachers and bigger population. But then you could go even further, let's say, to Western Alaska, and you may have, a bush, what they call a bush school. It's off the road system, and the indigenous language is the dominant language spoken there. And then you also have English and a schoolhouse that might have 100 kids in it. And so it's a very, very different experience. And so their district is comprised of 100 students total, So that creates a lot of challenges in Alaska of how do we meet the diverse needs within our state? Because, like you said, it's huge. And depending where you are regionally, you're going to have a very, very different experience.
That to me is unreal to think about. Just for me, and where I'm from, I don't know, like it seems really unfair then to try to compare a whole bunch of different areas, but yet that's what America continues to try to do, right? Is we try to standardize every kid and say, okay, well, here's where 5th grade is in Nebraska, and here's where it is in Alaska and Texas and blank. This is where you should all be. And that is so unfair and such a disservice.
Yeah, it really is. And when you think about even what we call bush or remote Alaska, subsistence is still very much a part of their day-to-day life. And so when I first started teaching, I taught at the state-run boarding school in Sitka, Alaska. And the name of the school is called Mount Edgecombe High School. And it has a very long, rich tradition of students in very far remote areas of Alaska traveling all the way to Southeast to attend boarding school. Wow. And they do that because their village schools are small and oftentimes maybe stop at 7th or 8th grade. And so these kids wanting to continue their education, their only choice then at the time was to go to boarding school. But many of my students, they would even take 2 weeks off of school because they would have to go home and help with the whale harvest. So that's a very, very different experience than growing up in a town where you have a Walmart and, a Safeway, and you go down to the 7-Eleven. I mean, you have all of your needs met. And so, yes, their school experience is very different, and it's very much shaped by geography. Just one other little thing, you brought up, Josh, state standardized exams or national exams. When you say down south where you live, what does that mean?
For me?
Yeah. What does that mean?
Nebraska. So like the heart of the continental.
Right. And so in Alaska, though, when we say down south, we mean Seattle, Washington. So just little things like language of, trying to acquire a standardized way of referring to different regions within the continental United States. So
Wow.
yeah, it's special. And you mentioned Hawaii, and I think a lot of Alaskans have a strong little kinship with Hawaiians and the idea of, this beautiful paradise in the South Pacific, but just the remoteness in a way, and how a lot of times when you look at a map, Alaska's placed right next to Hawaii or even in the Gulf of Mexico. We kind of feel a little like we're an afterthought, and sometimes that works to our advantage, and sometimes we get our feelings hurt. But
what are some other innovative apps that you use? Are there any innovative curriculums that you use in your classroom, or anything that you think the rest of the world could benefit from knowing about?
Yeah, I came across the United States Institute of Peace a few years ago and really glommed onto their resources, and then discovered they had a peace teachers program. And I thought, I need to apply for this. And I was accepted. And so just as a resource that's been successful to supplement what I was already doing in my classroom, they have a toolkit for educators, and it's on their website. So if you go to the United States Institute of Peace, and it's called the Peace Teachers Educator Toolkit, I think that's what it is, but it's a PDF version for both middle school and high school. Oh, cool. And so when we talk about SEL, there are great resources out there, like through National University, for K or pre-K through 6, but there isn't really a lot out there for the upper grades. And right. So that's one program that I found, and it's free. Their resources are great. They're vetted. And you can get on there and easily integrate them into your classroom practice already. The one that my students really love, there is an online assessment tool of what's your conflict style. Really? And so students will go through these questions, and then they kind of determine, oh, I'm a problem solver, or I'm an avoider, or I'm, kind of the negotiator of the group. So they learn what their conflict styles are. And that's a really good starting point for conflict resolution. And then getting them to see that each one of us has avenues to build peace. So USIP is kind of my go-to one for right now. All
right. Is that more dedicated towards high school students? Because I've got a class that could use that, understanding like how they, hey, I don't agree with you right now, but here's where I'm coming from, kind of a thing. So is that more dedicated to high school?
It's great. So it's all geared for middle school and high school. Yep.
All right. I might check it out and see if it works with upper elementary then.
Ooh, that would be exciting. Yeah, I think, they have some really fun parables and some, good images on there that might be an entry point to get people. Have you seen like those images where you look and you can see a woman in it, but then if you look again, you see something else, right? Yeah. And so that's great, because sometimes those kids are so locked in. They're like, no, it's a woman, and no, it's a guy playing an instrument, and then you get this conversation going about perspective. And a lot of times it's a difference of perspective of what starts the conflict.
Yeah.
And and we use that in class to talk about learning differences too. Like the way that you look at it might not be the same that I do, but we can still have a discussion, right? Like we don't have to, it's amazing how many ways that you can look at one thing and have so many teaching points to it, right?
Yeah, and some of us get really excited about that and like it, and others are like, no.
Sarah, this has been amazing, and I gotta know a few more things before we let you go. because we've got a lot of teachers on here that are getting ready to go in education, a lot of teachers that have been here for a while that maybe have lost their spark.
Mhm.
I'm curious though, what's the most important thing that we're facing right now in education? Because I hope at least that we're coming out of COVID. We're
Yeah.
figuring out what we're gonna look like after this. I hope we've
Right.
made some leaps and bounds from where we were. What are we
Yeah,
looking
and
forward to?
I get exactly what you're saying. Maybe this is a good time for us also to really think about, we do this in our own practice in our classroom, I hope, right? What works, what's working, what hasn't been working, but we're continuing on, what could we change? And so we have this very set traditional model that has worked for a long time, but is it anymore? So I look at it as an opportunity for maybe more schools within schools, maybe more school choice. Rethinking, we always have this debate at the high school, should we let the kids sleep in longer and have a delayed start, so that they can rest and all of that. So, whatever it might be, I just look at this as a really exciting time in education of how can we take what is really useful and relevant, but then build upon that. And so, if anything, with the at-home learning, it has to be relevant.
And I think we're entering an unknown time, right? Like
True.
you're saying that everything needs to be relevant.
Mhm.
We've got to work to make it work for the kids. We've got
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
there's my dog. So
Yeah, and that's another fun part about what we've been doing, right? Is pets. I've learned so much about my students when at Zoom sessions of what their houses look like and their cat or their dog that they'd bring with them to class, which was pretty amazing.
it's just you're right. It is such a beautiful time in education, and I hope that we take it the right way, right? Because
Yeah.
it could definitely go the wrong way. At least from what I see, I don't know what it's like in Alaska, but when I
Yeah.
talk with teachers from Idaho and they say, you can be a substitute teacher if you graduated high school, or
Yes.
like stuff like that. Like that's a slap in the face to people like us, to teachers that care about what they do. That, oh, you went to school so you could teach school, and that's not the road we need to go down.
Right. Well, and I will say that, with pandemic schooling or whatever you want to call it, when schools were closed, oh my gosh, parents were championing and singing our praises, right? Because they wanted their kids in school. They knew that school was important. It's not just the learning, it's the socialization that occurs. It's the connection that happens. There's so much more than just completing the math assignment, right? But it's also this group joined collective effort that, hey, education and learning is important. That's why we're all here today. And so I look at it a little bit differently in the sense of, I don't think public school will go away and schooling will go away, because boy, families all across America have been singing our praises and saying, we want our kids in school no matter what. So I think that's a great thing, but it is also an opportunity to say, at the high school level, is the 6-period day, the traditional bell schedule, is that really what we should be doing? Or should we be rethinking that a little bit? So I am excited. I will tell teachers that we need you. We need your creativity. We need your hearts. We need your energy. So go into this profession. It still has value. I will say that the pay, people say you don't go into education to become rich, and it's definitely true. You're not going to get rich. In the state of Alaska, you're also not going to be poor being a teacher either. But having said that, we in the state of Alaska, our salaries have decreased quite a bit, and there is a national teacher shortage.
Yeah.
And in my community alone last year, we did not have enough applicants for the positions, and we had to start broadening and expanding our advertising, and we actually selected 9 teachers on J1 visas from foreign countries to come teach in Ketchikan this year. So, I mean, when I started, there were hundreds of applicants vying for one position. Now we had so many going unfilled that, fortunately we found people from around the world to come work here. But I'm really nervous if that's what's happening in Ketchikan, Alaska, what is happening in San Francisco, California, what's happening in, other, Florida, wherever, right? We need to attract people to this profession because it is vital for our students.
Yeah, for our society, really.
Yeah.
If we want a well-functioning society, we have to have a well-educated society.
Absolutely.
Sarah, I could come to Ketchikan and listen and talk education with you for hours. I think I really could. Like, it's been so much fun. At the end of every episode, we always ask one question, and it's kind of the bell ringer question. And if Josh is in the mood for singing, sometimes he'll throw out a couple of lines of the song. Back in the 60s.
World needs now is what we need to know, right?
Yes.
That's it. Sarah, what does the world need now?
I think the world needs connection. I think we need to re-energize and rebuild our connections within ourselves, within our families, within our schools, our communities, our nation, our world. We need to find positive ways to connect with people because that's how we make great things happen. And if we're in isolation, we run the risk of not being very happy, not being very inspired. And again, I stress we need positive sources of connection. I think sometimes it's too easy to get onto social media and think you're connected, but you're really not. And so making it intentional with purpose and with meaning for an ultimate outcome or goal, that's what I feel like the world needs more is connection.
I love that you hit on the social media part, because I think even as a 5th grade teacher, and I bet Tom feels it as a 4th grade teacher, like our kids feel like, oh, I've got all of these friends because this person follows me. And I'll be like, well, who is that person? I don't know. That's not a connection then, right? Like it's gotta be that true connection, that way of communicating, being able to understand each other, to love each other, right? Like it's a different level of connection than what the world right now has and what we're talking about.
Right.
So I love that you're preaching on that.
Yeah.
Well,
awesome.
Yeah, good.
Sarah, thank you for being here. I appreciate it a ton.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's our show. We're so thankful and appreciative that you took your time to listen to our guest, Sarah Campbell. Hopefully you're ready for another week of changing lives, and hopefully what the world needs now is helping you to sustain your inspiration as we journey through this school year together. If it is, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It helps us to get inspirational educator stories out.
We hope that as you head out, you remember the biggest factor that plays into student success is you. Your love, your empathy, your passion, your dedication. It's exactly what the world needs now. Thank you for everything you do. Have a good one.